Warm good afternoon to everyone. This is very difficult. We have just had a heavy lunch after a long day, and then I have been asked to ensure that the audience does not sleep. So one trick that I have picked up is that usually when I speak after the lunch, I usually have a PPT in which I can show certain pictures and images which keeps you awake. But here's an interesting question that I want to start with. Okay, and I'll also end with a question. This is a topic that could be never ending. So I'm going to be focusing only a few points and look forward to the address by Professor Ramaswamy. How many of you have heard of Chat GPT? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, 4 people in the hall have heard of Chat GPT. So Chat GPT is an extremely recent, almost like probably 2 months, not even 2 months, I think a month-old chatbot that has been developed by this company called OpenAI. OpenAI was started by a bunch of people, including Elon Musk, who later on resigned, but of course he continues to be a donor. Now, why is ChatGPT as a chat? I mean, there are hundreds of chatbots available out there. But why is this so particularly unique and important? It is considered to be the most profound and powerful chatbot that has ever been invented or coded by humankind in the last several decades of computer science applications. And one of the reasons why this chat, I mean, there are all kinds of powerful codes in it, but one of the reasons why it pertains or relates to all of us is because ChatGPT is being used by students to submit their assignments, which are essay-type assignments to the teachers, and teachers simply cannot tell whether it is written by the student or a computer. It's unbelievable. It might be factually inaccurate, but it learns because it has huge amount of data and it produces very human-like responses. Like for instance, I can ask them, so it's very easy to ask how far is Dharwad from Pune. But let's say if you were to ask, what do you think Dharwad will look like 50 years from now? This question is a tricky question and not very easy for computers to answer. This chatbot can provide an essay pulling out huge amount of, I mean, this is an artificial intelligence, so it learns, it codes itself in some sense. And therefore, there are all kinds of noises and voices from Sundar Pichai to all the bigwigs of Silicon Valley who are talking about we have to do something because it will kill student assignments, amongst many other things. Information technology or knowledge worker in tomorrow's world is now going to be very happy about Chat GPTs out there. You will not really know whether somebody who's selling you a product is a chatbot or a human. Now, why is this important to us? Of course, one thing is about assignments, and Chat GPT recently also came up with a response that any response that comes from Chat GPT, it will have a bookmark, it will have a watermark, so people know that this is a response of a computer. But the reason it is important is because production of these type of technologies does not take place only by computer scientists. Here's another question. Which is the second most coveted background, qualification to get a job in Silicon Valley? Like we all know, you have to be a very smart developer, but there's something else that they're badly in need of all the time. And the answer might surprise some of you, is the philosophers and ethicists. Symbolic System in Stanford is considered to be the most pioneering program, sort of graduate program, which has produced some of the most amazing and brilliant computer scientists in the world today. This program tries to marry linguistics, philosophy, and computational sciences. The world is moving in a direction where a singular discipline is simply unable to take care or execute large projects that affect each of our lives. And this does not mean that people of only the same person studies many disciplines, but people are exposed to many disciplines because they can sit in a room and have a conversation with somebody who has come from an entirely different one. I did engineering, and after that I did law. I did economics in my PhD. And I know by personal experience the different types of frameworks that I could bring into the classrooms or conversations or my own research because I understood certain language spoken by a certain group of disciplinarians. You will be surprised to know, for example, one of the most recent things that I've heard is that geographers, people cartographers in particular, who make maps, they are being taught about how does the eye and the optical fibers inside our eyes work. Because when you make a map, you have to take away a lot of details because otherwise it will confuse the viewer. in order to understand that, you have to understand how human beings perceive things from their eyes. Almost 40% of our total data that our mind absorbs is visual data. And a lot of that data is therefore discarded. A little bit of that data is retained. How do you ensure that what you show on the map is retained in the mind? Means you have to not only understand neuroscience, but particularly neuroscience that relates to certain part of pupil, which cartographers are now being exposed to. And this is, if it's happening now, somewhere it'll happen where we are 5 years later, 10 years later. And so I don't want to, so I want to start this conversation by triggering this idea that straitjacketing expert conversations in one discipline at the undergraduate level specifically is over, because we have suffered a lot in the last 50 to 100 years. What experts have done, experts would fly from World Bank and IMF and tell India what to do. And thank God that we did not listen to them entirely. And whenever we listened, we paid the price. Countries that listened to these experts paid the price. There are all kinds of interesting knowledge systems that remain within the ecosystem that you're part of. And all of that knowledge is always useful. In fact, I often say many people in India are smart and interdisciplinary despite education, not because of it. Now think about a problem, any problem, and you will realize that the world responds, your students will respond to problems and maybe even personal crises. None of them are going to be falling into the same discipline. A little bit of research on that. This is a map. So there's this problem that a bunch of scientists were trying to solve on obesity. Obesity is a major problem in the Western countries, particularly the US. The interconnections of how do you resolve obesity is mind-bogglingly complex. This is the interconnection. I've tried to simplify it by telling you what were those smaller little items that you couldn't see. So obesity is, so you can see, right? So obesity is impacted by activity of the environment, individual activity, biology, food consumption, psychology, societal influences, and food production. And each of them have internal linkages of millions of, so this doesn't mean that you have to understand obesity, you have to be an expert in all these sciences. But you have to know what these sciences talk about at the basics, so that you can sit with somebody who's talking in his or her language, which you are able to absorb and get. It's a very simple, sort of flow chart of climate change. A lot has been talked about climate change, but let me tell you, we cannot be, I hope everyone, at least in this audience, believes that climate change is real. When I travel abroad, that's the first question I have to ask, and there are always some climate skeptics who raise their hands. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is largest in last 2 million years. We have not had so much of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we only know a little bit about it because we very quickly think about this as a scientific problem. The CO2 levels rise, which means the temperatures are going to rise. If the temperatures are going to rise, the Arctic's ice cap is going to melt, and therefore we're going to be flooded with lots and lots of water. Sea levels will rise, and therefore some cities will get flooded. I think this is the framework that all of us know. But a multidisciplinary mind will be able to also trigger certain other extensions. If cities on the western coast of India start flooding, and by the way, what I'm talking about is not very far ahead. By 2050, I think the average temperatures will go to 1.75 degrees to 2 degrees above. And I think we all feel that, right? Dharwad would have been a little cooler 20 years ago at this time, but it is no longer so. If that happens, 1.75 degrees, you're talking about more than 50 to 60 meter rise of sea level, which means a good part of coastal India would be flooded, and Dharwad will witness a huge amount of migration from coastal cities, and this population of this town will swell. So you have a crisis of migration. More than that, migration crisis is never alone. It comes with a crisis of culture. It comes with a crisis of jobs and employment. It comes with a crisis of politics, and suddenly the whole new world has been invented. The rise of CO2 also leads to larger amount of carbon in the oceans, which kills the coral reefs, which means almost 1/3 of the species, the marine species will die out. In some sense, what I'm talking about is there's going to be food consumption reduction of protein, which definitely comes from fish across the world. This means we are looking at a world where you might want to eat tablets of proteins. Again, medical science is invoked. Now, I don't want to paint a grim picture. That's not the reason why I'm showing this. The reason why I'm showing this is an expert in migration cannot really think about migration as a science which is not dependent on climate change, which cannot be thought about without looking at industry. And by the way, here's an interesting news. Recent research shows that out of the total emission in the atmosphere, 30%, 1/3 comes from agriculture and agricultural practices. Of course, in agriculture, I'm including animal husbandry. And beef, cows, production of cow, commercial usage of cows in the Western countries is causing a huge amount of, emission of methane and the carbon dioxide gas emissions. Just another example of why multidisciplinarity is important. In other words, we are at a very, very powerful moment when NEP has pushed us, sort of in some sense mandated, that please begin thinking about multidisciplinarity. I'm going to talk about what that is, because I think there is some confusion, and the remaining discussion I want to do on very practical terms and how can universities and colleges, perhaps, because I engage with many universities and colleges trying to help them organize their core as well as their elective curriculum in a multidisciplinary fashion, and I'll give some of my ideas here in case they're useful to some of you. But it's important to note that NEP has located this, that if you don't do multidisciplinary education, you will create these straight-jacketed boys and girls who only know about one discipline. It's not even about knowing one discipline. It's about thinking in one discipline. A historian thinks like a historian, and a lawyer thinks like a lawyer. And I can give countless examples. You may have your sons and daughters who are studying certain type of discipline, and it's sometimes so difficult to engage with them because the attitude is like 3 or 4 years of churning through one type of discipline makes them think in one direction. And that is disastrous for a society as a whole. And frankly, India should be, the harbinger of making multidisciplinary as the fundamental driver of our conversations. India has, the course curriculum of Takshashila and Nalanda, it was as interdisciplinary or as multidisciplinary as it could potentially get, right? We were not talking about 64 kala, 64 kalas for nothing. Anyway, so this is just a quick background on number of sections in NEP invoke multidisciplinarity, right? In particular sections, chapter 11, little bit of chapter 10, and minorly of chapter 15. They are, so when you read an NEP, if you read chapter 11, you'll get a good sort of perspective on what NEP talks about. The interesting thing, however, here is that NEP interchangeably uses the word multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. And I'm sure many of you have thought about this. What is the point of having these two terminologies if the meaning is the same? So I thought I'll draw something drawn from a lot of research that has happened in this area. So the first one is intradisciplinary. This is what we usually do, right? The second one is multidisciplinary, which means each of these small circles are essentially different kinds of subjects, right? So the first one is physics. The second one is physics in the center, but languages, linguistics on the top, computer somewhere else, history somewhere else, but they're all kind of separate from each other. But they're still within the big circle is, let's say, the circle of the mind or circle of your degree that you're granting. The circle at the center is the main degree, and all the others are peripheral. So main subject and all the others are peripheral subjects. So you study all kinds of subjects. Does not mean that you use one theory of one subject and plant it on the other. The moment you start doing it, you move to sort of interdisciplinary. I'm going to leave cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary for the moment for the sake of time. But the first, second, and the fourth circle is what's important for us. So whenever the word interdisciplinary is used, usually it invokes using ideas of one discipline and applying it in another. So you use postmodernism in social sciences. So gender studies is a classic example of interdisciplinary studies. Yeah? Or you use historical analysis to prove that India was extremely prolific. India's GDP was very high in the past before British came. This is called cliometry. So you're using historical tools to understand economy of India, right? That's interdisciplinary. But when a student is studying history and economics in two different class hours, that's multidisciplinary. Why is this important? Because even now in most colleges and universities, a BA history will have very little economics taught in it. This is purely my experience. It could be different in different colleges. A BA economics will hardly read anything about history. So what we want to do through multidisciplinary education and research is at least tell the world or tell the students, look, this is another way of looking at the same thing. Or more than that, this is what historians have talked about. So what is the approach to history, for example, or what is the approach to physics? How do physicists think? So very small, simple, basic primer on introduction to physics to somebody who's otherwise an economist. This, this, this does wonders and magic with the mind. You teach a lawyer something to do with, I don't know, mathematics. It does wonder to his or her mind. You teach somebody who's doing literature and give him or her some idea about inorganic chemistry. It does wonder to the mind. But the core remains the same. So the second figure, which is the subject in the middle, remains the same. So if somebody is doing BA history, good number of their credits are coming from history. But this person is also doing philosophy, this person is doing physics, and this person is also doing computation sciences. Just to understand what on earth, how on earth is a computer thinking? What is a logic gate for that matter? And we also now know it's not too difficult to translate these disciplines at introductory level to kids who are otherwise not taking that discipline. You don't necessarily need to have laboratories to teach physics. Introduction to physics can be done. And in that sense, I am going to be calling out hugely for collaborative efforts. So universities that have laboratories should open their labs to universities in the same cities who don't have laboratories and allow their history teachers to go and teach a little bit there. Because otherwise it becomes very difficult and costly for Indian universities to adopt multidisciplinary very soon. So many of you may know what is Google Ngram. Ngram is essentially how many times a certain string, a certain word has appeared in the books in the last 200 years that have been digitized by Google. Okay, and Google has digitized a vast number of books. So I just looked up on the internet, and anyone can do this. You can, I don't know, you can search anything, India, democracy, Narendra Modi, whatever name you write, that name will, how many times has it appeared in books around the world will be picked up. And you can see, so the word multidisciplinary has started getting picked up since the 1960s. Okay, it has gone up, kind of slight dip, but then continues to go up. So multidisciplinary is the way to go in some sense is what I'm trying to say. But if you compare this with interdisciplinary, you know that interdisciplinarity has had a slightly longer history and also equal. In other words, getting disciplines to talk to each other or getting the student to study more than one discipline is an idea whose time has already come. It's a little bit of a calculation that I did. This is doctoral dissertations. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time on this graph because I wanted to discuss a little bit of history of how these disciplines emerged, but that's for another time. But so my PhD was in law and economics. Okay, I did a purely interdisciplinary study where I studied some subjects in law, some in economics. My advisor was a lawyer, but my topic was relatively, tilted more towards economics. So I had a secondary supervisor who was an economist. And these guys gave me some supervision. Now this is tricky, but it's not very difficult because I've experienced this. And also, while the mainstream journals in economics and law will attract purely legal and purely economics articles, there are all kinds of interdisciplinary journals now that there are. And I personally know, so it has been a little difficult a few years ago, but things are changing rapidly. If you look at the dissertation topics in multiple disciplines, it came down, so disciplines is really a 100-year-old invention. Before that, people used to think in larger contexts. It's only in the last, I think 80 to 90 years, largely because of American obsession with specialization that the universities around the world have become disciplinarian. Otherwise, education has always been holistic. In most part of the world, definitely in India. The Indian education system was destroyed by British. We don't want to get into that. It'll take a long time and a lot of emotions. But you see the multidisciplinary PhDs are going down, and now they have started to come up again because the world realized the horrors of what experts do. And so interdisciplinarity is a cry that is kind of global in nature. This is the interdisciplinary degrees that are being offered, and clearly, and this is something that I often say, doctoral programs can be very discipline specific. Masters to some extent, there is no need to keep bachelor program very, very discipline specific. There are 2-3 reasons for it. Number one, because enrollment rate has been increasing rapidly, like the enrollment rate has doubled in the last 10 years, doubled. Right now it's around 25%, which means 25 people getting out of class 12th find a college. This number was 10% 12, 13 years ago, which means we don't have enough schools and colleges to supply. And so there's an aspiration of young minds today and their parents that everyone should have a college degree. And the deal is India at 35, we need to reach 50% enrollment ratio. Most of them are are going to aspire for master's degree. The moment this is done, if everyone is an undergraduate degree holder, then one way to distinguish my career is to do a master's degree. And if you do a master's, which is going to be more specialized, there is really no reason why bachelor should be so discipline specific. I mean, there are some reasons, but not overwhelming. At Flame University, we do liberal arts courses all the time, and we have 300 to 400 odd majors and minors to choose from. Most of them get their master's degree admissions somewhere, and then their career is defined by that degree. But they become a far more holistic thinker because someone who's done performing arts has also studied economics, one subject at least, right? Introduction to economics. Yeah. Now, I'll just quickly tell you if there is a way. So I keep advising many universities and colleges. There is a certain metric that I think could potentially be applied in case your colleges or universities thinking of adopting multidisciplinary framework. You know, I'm going to pick up a few of them. So first of all, this is for a greenfield university or a college, but even brownfield university or college can pick up some of these ideas. It's extremely important and crucial to evolve the structure and the philosophy of the program. What is it that we want to do? That requires some thinking and brainstorming. After that, this is my claim, after that, it's not very difficult. I will go so far to say it is not even budgetarily so overwhelmingly burdensome. It will have some impact on the budgets if you convert your degrees into multidisciplinary degrees, but it is not overwhelmingly, burdensome. So for instance, one of the ways, so if I have to divide 80, so this is something that I did for some university. If you have to divide, let's say 80 credits, one way to do it is to convert those credits into what are the type of curriculum frameworks that students will learn. So 4 frameworks that I adopted for this particular college, and this could be different for different colleges, is ethics, creative expression, scientific inquiry, and social inquiry. Ethics means that you must, no matter where you are, whatever degree you are doing, you must have some civilizational understanding of who you are. If you don't have that, then why are you educating to begin with? Right? I mean, like I said, ChatGPT or robots will be able to do this. So civilizational understanding comes from reading all kinds of things, not just Western classics, but Indian classics. Right? So courses that allow that to emerge or flourish in the mind of student could be categorized, and some credits could go into ethics. Some of them could go into creative expression. These are courses that relate to communications, for instance, which is increasingly going to become more and more powerful currency for career. Communication, writing skills, and also, I would say, dance and theater and performance arts. A student came to me and said that, sir, I am doing business school. I'm an MBA student in IIM Ahmedabad. Why would I need to study theater or fine art? Even if, so there is a workshop, why would I need to do the workshop? Well, so these guys, when these guys become the CEOs of companies, the ad agencies come to them with sample ads. Sir, there are 3-4 ads, aap choose kar lijiye, isme kaun sa acha hai. If this guy doesn't have, a little bit of sensitivity towards art, he or she will probably pick up, something which doesn't appeal to the eyes, and the scared employees will not even challenge him. They'll say, sir, haan, this is a good, isi ko kar dete hain. And all you know is that billions and millions of dollars were spent on that ad, but because this guy had, most bosses are fearsome people, right? And so this is what I told this boy, that look, listen, you need to have this sensitivity, because tomorrow you will decide on something which is otherwise artistic, and you will have no context about it. And so that's important. Scientific inquiry, subjects related to science, and social inquiries, subjects related to social science. The same subjects and the same credits are re-articulated in 3 other fashion, which is exposure, which means evolving your personality. This is only for bachelors. Skills, which means your expertise, and then depth of knowledge, which is your own domain knowledge, that is intellect. Sort of 1/3. A very simple, so I'm going to skip this because this will take me a long time, but essentially then you design the structure. 1 credit is 15 hours. So many are the number of credits that we want to adopt. It might be useful to think about reducing the credit size so that you can have more subjects to be taught. So rather than 4 credits and 1 credit is 15 hours, you could have, 2 credit course, introduction to history or historical thinking about itihasa. Could be just a 2 credit course. Let engineers go through this. They will thank you maybe 10 years later, not at that time perhaps. And so smaller courses, maybe trimester rather than semester, and these are permutation combinations that could be done without much cost. So you collect all the resources that are existing within the college and reorganize them in some form of as if there's some game going on. And really, if this is gamified by people, teachers and principals, and we have done this, like it's really interesting and fun. Anyway, so this could be a potential. This is not to be taken at its face value. A lot of things have changed since the time I was advising them. But this could be one potential way of looking at it. So if you look at, I don't know, I don't have the. No, okay, anyway. So if you see the columns, so you have the 4 categories of columns, which is ethics. So the type of courses in ethics are the type of courses that give you civilizational ethos, right? Creative expressions. Now, the reason why there are some italics, some capital is because they are different credits. So there are so many courses in creative expressions, but very little credits, which means people are exposed to it. They need not, have their masters. And by the way, the credit structure that we were doing in the previous case must conform to the UGCs, which is that if you're doing a major in some discipline, so let's say if I am a BA in economics, then out of the total number of, let's say, 120 credits that I get in 4 years, X number of credits must be core economics discipline. Those are sacrosanct, you don't touch them. But you can still plant them in the category of ethics, creative expression. So for instance, narrating a complex economic theory is an 8-hour module, which is part of a larger subject, but is pulled out and planted in the construct of creative expression. Because this is going to be useful for this child tomorrow when he or she goes out. And suddenly what you've done is, you have just recreated something from something that you already had, right? It might sound very easy, it's a little tricky, but I can tell you it's not that tricky either, right? And again, on the row side, you can see exposure, skill, and depth. So each course can be either exposure-based, skill-based, and you realize that by the second year, your skill and depth courses are becoming more and more, right? I'm going to skip this because this is going to take time, and I want to hang up now. But this is one sort of a university tree that you could perhaps evolve, right? There are certain very core foundational areas. You see, the reason why I'm showing this is because a lot of times multidisciplinary engagement end up becoming engagement where people are doing, I don't know, noughts and crosses, some courses here and there. It's like kind of a jigsaw puzzle people are playing. But what I am trying to say is that it must be predicated, or it must be structured around a larger philosophy, which could potentially look like a tree. So these are the outcomes perhaps on the leaves, and through some specialization, these outcomes come. And this is only my formulation. Of course, you can have your formulation, but it's good to have a formulation of this type. And I'll end here by saying that, India is, we come from the tradition of Advaita, which means there is no dualism, which means everything is one. And multiple isms is a product of the Western thinking in some sense. So high levels of expertise and specializations and disciplines are in a way, therefore, taking science away from culture is what modernity did. They said, oh, well, this is scientific, this is cultural, and they relegated culture below science. And the world has seen the horrors of those type of things. If there is a place in the world which can arrest this thinking, in practice, it's this, right? Over here, we do not necessarily make distinctions between nature and culture. Nature is part of culture, and culture is part of nature. In that sense, why are we then creating these disciplinary singularities in the minds of young students who is looking at the world in a very composite, holistic manner, but is unfortunately unable to score exams by thinking holistically? And I think that is, for India, it should be easy relative to the other places, because pluralism, it comes so naturally to us. Thank you so much.